Hello, this is Russell Moore, and you're listening to The Russell Moore Show, brought to you by Christianity Today. Every week, we explore here conversations and questions from a Christian perspective to help you sort out how to live as a follower of Jesus in confusing times. And this week, we have a conversation to seek to do just that. My guest, Nancy French, has written a book called Ghosted, an American Story that really put me in an ethical dilemma. And here's what it was. I was tempted to lie. And the reason I was tempted to lie is because I read this book and I told Maria, this is the most amazing memoir I have ever read, both in terms of storyline and in terms of literary power. And I thought, if I say what I really think about this book having to do with a friend of ours, it's going to sound like I'm just making it up because she's our friend. But at the same time, if I don't say what I think about it, I'm not going to be telling the truth. So I just sort of toned down what I would have said, but it's the most amazing memoir I think I've ever read. It's like Joan Didion meets Hillbilly Elegy, meets Flannery O'Connor, meets Frederick Buechner. Okay, so just imagine all that mixed in together, plus hilarity. And this is what I was trying to describe to somebody. I said, this is what this section of the book is about. And I started talking about it was really, really dark stuff. I said, and it is hilarious. And the person said, how is that hilarious? I said, you just have to read it to understand how that's the case. Nancy French, thanks for being on the show today.
Russell, thank you so much for all the kind words and for having me. This is so much fun. This is my first time to talk about the book.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. For those of you who don't know, Nancy French is a 5-time New York Times bestselling author. She has been a ghostwriter, part of the meaning of the word ghosted. And she has written for a lot of people, from Republican politicians to reality TV stars. She's also an award-winning investigative journalist. She uncovered sexual and spiritual abuse at America's largest Christian camp and wrote about that to great effect and controversy over the past year and a half or so. And now, the memoir, Ghosted. You do talk about a lot of dark stuff in here, including some of your own experience growing up. And I'm wondering, sometimes it's hard for me when I'm writing about something like that to think, how much do I tell and how much do I not tell? And are people going to be that I know and I love, are they going to be offended when they hear this? And are they going to say, are you making fun of our hometown or something like that? How did you work through all of that as you were writing this?
I delayed writing this for a long time because my parents are still alive, but I decided to go ahead and write it as if they would never read it. And I'm not sure that my dad, who learned his ABCs in his 20s, has read any of my books, but I decided to write it just honestly. And then I decided to ask them for their blessing, not their permission, but their blessing. So I drove over there. I dreaded it. I put it off for 6 months. I dreaded it. And I went into my parents' house and I said, okay, they didn't even know I was writing a book. And it had already leaked. It was already on Amazon. So I told them about the book, and it was the most surreal, enlightening, amazing conversation I've ever had in my life. They were supportive. It was awful. We cried. My dad explained some of his reasoning about some of his decisions in the past that were so understandable for him and his circumstance. And at the end of the conversation, he said, you know, I was at church and the preacher preached about a year ago about being a better father. So mind you, my dad's like 84 years old. And he said, and I've been praying every night that I could be a better father. And so
Wow.
I said, oh my gosh, well, this is your opportunity, you know? And I'd given him this opportunity and he responded graciously and my mother was gracious. It was so beautiful. And they could have died and me never had that conversation. And the things they told me in that conversation were so enlightening because they provided me sort of like an understanding of why they, you know, raised me the way they did. And it helped them understand me more. It was just so beautiful.
Yeah. That's the kind of dad I want to be at 84.
Right?
That's incredible.
So sweet.
You talk about in the book a really complicated picture of growing up in the church and as relating to the church. As you were writing this, what sorts of things did you discover about how Christian life in the Bible Belt affected you later on?
You know, I loved going to church. It was my favorite thing in the world. I loved potlucks. I loved communion. I loved Sunday school. I loved a youth group. I loved it. And then when I was sexually abused by my vacation Bible school teacher, it sort of took the shine off that. And so in the past few years, I've just sort of been reevaluating my preconceptions, especially with my investigative work on Kanakuk camps. I've been so disillusioned by everything. And so I just struggle to read the Bible. I struggle to pray. I struggle to go to church now. But this book writing process was so beautiful because I got this sort of like 30,000 foot view of my life. And I could see God's hand working with me, on me, for me, the whole way through. Even in the yucky parts, he was there. And so there was something just so beautiful about that because you know that God is never going to betray you, even if the church does.
When I think about all of the church sexual abuse survivors that I know in recent years who have come forward and who have had people do everything they can to absolutely destroy their lives. I step back and I think, as awful as the first crime was, then it's compounded with just, people wouldn't even believe the sorts of things that are said to people. And I remember Maria and I both just livid with fury after what some people would say after you told your story about the Vacation Bible School abuse. I think in the context of the Roy Moore controversy several years ago and the Access Hollywood controversies and so forth. And telling that story in the way that people would come after you and blame you for what you survived, it was almost a dress rehearsal for what we would see 1,000 times over. How do people even have the courage now to talk about what they've been through when they get this kind of stuff?
I don't know. I hadn't even talked about my abuse to my counselor, but he knew that it happened and he asked me to tell him about it. And I was so unable to speak. I couldn't tell the story. So because I'm a writer, he goes, look, I've got an idea. Go home, write it down, bring that piece of paper back. I'll read it. You don't have to say it. It doesn't have to be out loud. And we can deal with it from there. And so I did as instructed. And then after I was finished, I thought it was so like powerful to get it on paper that I sent it to the Washington Post and they published it. And so when I did that, I brought it in the next week to my counselor and handed him a copy of the Washington Post. And he was like, okay, well, this is not normally how it's done, but I think we can do it. So the way that I did it was not the best way because I was not emotionally prepared for everything that happened after that, which was heinous and evil and also very encouraging and uplifting, depending on, you know, the people talking to you. So I am not sure. When people call me to ask about whether they should go public with their abuse, I'm always very sober-minded about it because it's been quite the travail.
Did you regret telling your story when you did?
I didn't. I got flowers in the mail. You know, people sent me flowers and I got cards in the mail. And my counselor warned me that I would regret perhaps doing it this way. But I never did. I thought it was so empowering. And the reason why I loved it is because it changed my entire outlook on life. Because the people that I thought would be my tribe, the people that I thought should support me, were horrific to me. And then the people that I thought would be my enemies because they were on the other side of the political aisle, they were supportive. And I don't know what to make of that, but it is a reality that I've adjusted to. And I'm very thankful for all of my friends of both political persuasions for being so supportive.
Yeah, isn't that wild? I mean, it is. It's really surreal. I know exactly what you're talking about, of course. And it is still surreal to see that. I wonder, with writing about really high profile cases, I mean, you mentioned your series on Kanakuk. What have you learned about the way that institutions, I mean, you talked about being disillusioned. What have you seen about the way institutions work in squelching people who have lived through awful things? I mean, we've seen that just over and over and over and over and over again. You've seen it up close. So have I. What did you learn in all of that?
I've learned terrible things, Russell. I've never really seen an institution with whom I've been connected respond correctly. Like, it's shocking. Even there's an organization that we donated to for forever. Well, yeah, 2 organizations. And when a scandal erupted, they just hid it. And I think what happens is these institutions were created for God's glory in various ways. And then they exchange that purpose for brand management, risk aversion, brand management. And so, as Curtis Chang has written, that is idolatry. And idolatry is all throughout the Bible. And when you read about idols in the Old Testament, they frequently demand sacrifice, including women and children. And I think that's what's happening now with all of these organizations. They're completely fine at sacrificing the lives and well-being emotionally of women and children just to survive. And it's quite shocking and it's horrific.
I wonder, is it going to get any better? I mean, you and I were reeling together in various ways in 2016 over the Access Hollywood tape, a presidential candidate talking about assaulting women. Now we're at a time when we've got another presidential campaign where the same candidate has been found liable for actual sexual assault. Not just talking about it, but for actual sexual assault. And nobody seems to even care. It doesn't even seem to come up. And I'm wondering, it seems like we had a moment where maybe the church and other institutions were coming to a reckoning and an accounting, but maybe we're not. Maybe we're normalizing all of this stuff in ways that are going to really hurt a lot of people.
I think so. And I'm not really smart enough to figure out what to do. I'll leave that to you and David. But I don't have much hope. I've just seen it, after the Me Too movement, which was so inspiring and difficult and grievous. I thought things would change. And I think maybe they did in the culture, but I don't think they did in the church. I think the church looked at that as some left-wing propaganda that they had to fight, and which is odd. But, with the Church Too movement, I just see a lot of people talking about it who are victims, but I don't see a lot of people talking about it who are institutions or churches or leaders.
You write about in the book several things that are not despondent at all. One of them is about meeting your husband. And even though I had heard the story many times from you and David, reading it was a different sort of experience. And as I'm reading it, I thought, I wonder if there are any moms who are reading this or somebody else who will think, well, gosh, that worked out for them, but I hope my daughter doesn't try it this way or something like that. It was a crazily quick process. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I met David French on a sidewalk at Lipscomb University, I think in 1995, yes. And we really hit it off. I remember I was there yesterday, actually. I saw the sidewalk where we first met, walked right down it. And we started chatting, and we chatted for 4 hours. And he was a complete stranger. And I remember leaving that conversation and thinking, I could talk to this person for the rest of my life and never be bored. And when I would say that to my parents or to other people, they would roll their eyes and say, oh, young love, it's so, idealistic. But I promise you, Russell, we're at 28 years and I was right. The guy is interesting. He's strange a little. Like I had to remove all the John Morant posters from behind me in his office. But in some ways he's like a 12-year-old boy, but he's amazing and he's interesting and wonderful. And I would not advise anyone to decide on their second date to get married or to get married in 3 months or whatever, like we did. That was insane. And whenever I talk about it, I have so many people send me horror stories about their own husbands who led double lives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm always like,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for you. I don't know why this worked out. It's just a miracle.
Well, you ended up in this interesting, very non-boring life, becoming a ghostwriter. You talk about this in the book, ghostwriting for people such as the Palin family and the Romneys and all kinds of other people. I don't know. Do people mind if they're identified as? It's usually they're upfront about the fact that they have somebody helping them write their book, so it's not like it's a shameful thing. So I guess people don't mind.
Yeah, no, some people do mind. It's weird, and I try not to work with those people because, again, sorry, this topic is coming up again. I do feel like it's idolatry in a way. I don't think it's deceptive because most celebrity books are written by people like me, unobscure people who, travel and do all this stuff and people don't really see us. We're in the background, but our agents do negotiate that. So I have to get to make sure that I can say it. I have to make sure it can be on my website. Sometimes we negotiate front cover name. My name's on there, microscopically. And sometimes I don't want my name on there. So we just have to work all that out. But my clients have been so wonderful. I love them so much. Even the ones with whom I now politically disagree, I just love them. And they've been an incredible part of my life.
You ended up actually living for a little while with the Palin family.
Yes.
With the Sarah Palin family, which had to be wild because I'm kind of like you. I have such mixed feelings because I'm in a very different place politically from Sarah Palin now, but I remember how thrilled I was by her in 2008 when she first came out and she started speaking. I don't think people really remember that because they think of everything else, whatever they think of Sarah Palin, for good or for bad, after that. But this amazing figure in terms of communicating and so forth. And you're there with them after they went from people in Alaska knowing them, but not the rest of the country, to being instantly some of the most controversial people on planet Earth.
Right.
What was it like to be in the house with them through all of that?
They were exactly like you think they would be. So that's what I tell people. So like I remember, because I am not great on details. And so I had an address. So I landed in Anchorage and I drove to the address and I thought it would be the Best Western in Lake Lucille or whatever. But it was Sarah Palin's house. And so I got to the gate and there are all these fans standing outside the gate, and the gate had colored Christmas lights because of course Sarah Palin is going to have colored Christmas lights, which I loved. And they were looking at me and snapping pictures, and they were like, I think that's Willow Palin. That's Willow. That's the girl. Take pictures. And so I was like, hello. But I drove up to the house and Sarah Palin opens the door and she's like, hi, I'm Sarah. Come in. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was expecting the Best Western, and what I got was salmon casserole, moose hot dogs, the entire family. It was like walking onto the set of, like Sarah Palin's Alaska, the reality TV show, which I watched every second of. And they were so kind and welcoming. And I also didn't plan for this. Sarah was like, hey, Bristol, show Nancy where she can put her bags. So I went into this studio that Todd had built for Fox News. And there was a room there. There's like an apartment, so lovely and accommodating and freaking cold, FYI. And they were so kind to me and warm. And we did things like we ran errands with the kids and ate dinner together. And they were just lovely to me. And it was treacherous because we were telling a story about Bristol Palin that is complicated. And we weren't going to try to spin it. That's one thing I try to do as a ghostwriter is not spin, but instead just tell the truth. Because I feel like God is glorified in our honesty, even if we've made mistakes.
Well, one of the cringiest moments of my life is being in a meeting with Mitt Romney and one of my staff members handing him a cup of coffee. And my sitting there looking across the room, he's a Latter-day Saint. He doesn't drink coffee. And I thought, part of what's so cringy about it is because you have this person who is one of the most upstanding figures in every arena of life that I know. And
Right.
so you're just like, oh man, this is kind of like your disappointing dad. So he was not disappointing. He handled it great. But you actually did more than that. You lied to Mitt Romney.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, I lied to Mitt Romney and almost killed him, honestly. Almost got myself killed too. But yeah, that was crazy. Now, one thing to know about the Romneys, they do keep caffeinated drinks at their house to serve guests because they're so hospitable, which is so kind. But yes, I did lie to Mitt Romney about my skiing prowess. For some reason, I thought I could fake it or something, but I could not. And we ended up having some serious issues, which it actually ended up with Mitt Romney and I being entangled together in a bodily mass that required him to push me off of him, I think by my butt. I didn't put that in the book, but I do think that happened. So that was supremely embarrassing.
That was around the time, or maybe it was after, that you and David were part of a group called, was it Evangelicals for Mitt?
That's right.
Yeah. And people who don't remember that time period probably don't remember just how controversial Mitt Romney was in evangelical circles because he is Latter-day Saint.
Right.
And so you were having to talk to a lot of evangelical Christians who just weren't sure about voting for somebody who wasn't a fellow born-again Christian. Did you ever see coming what we have now, where Mitt Romney is controversial, but not because of his Mormonism, because he doesn't believe in supporting people who've been found liable of sexual assault or overthrowing the government, stuff like that? I mean, it is wild how much has changed in that very short period of time.
It is crazy. And I wonder if it changed or if they were just sort of lying to us. I'm not sure, because back in the day, we started Evangelicals for Mitt, and we had our biblical arguments down about allying with LDS folks who were co-belligerents in the culture war and voted well and virtuous people. And I had all the scripture down, and we would go to people's homes and church offices, and we'd go to churches and we'd talk to our friends, and we made the argument that he was an acceptable and moral choice. And then 5 minutes later, these same people, they're like, that guy who appeared in Playboy, that's my guy. And I was thinking, I just don't think you can change that much. I think they were lying to us. I know that's a shock.
Yeah. Well, here's my theory of the case.
Okay.
I've said for several years, if you had just swapped out Mitt Romney for Glenn Beck, also LDS, the people who were so objecting to Romney for being Mormon would have been totally cool with that.
Interesting. I wonder.
Because I don't think it's the theology. I think it's what we have seen, that what is so enraging to a lot of people are the very reasons that those of us who would admire Romney do.
Right. Yes. I think it's sort of like a conviction of the Holy Spirit too, because evangelicals do not like to be out-virtued by Mormons. And when you've got a Mormon telling you, hey, maybe we don't elect this serial philanderer / liar / insurrectionist, it sort of pricks your conscience, because you think, no, I'm the one who's the one. I'm the guy on social media talking about virtue and tradition and values and the Bible. How dare that? I don't know. It's just so bizarre because there's no accounting for it. I mean, at the time, I think you're right that Glenn Beck probably maybe would have done better. But at the time, I called him Governor Romney, and he had a very conservative record, even in Massachusetts, which makes people apoplectic every time I bring it up. But I think a lot of these accusations against him are code for xenophobia, like, oh, he's a Massachusetts liberal or he's a Yankee or whatever. But it's just so complicated. And I regret every second I spent trying to convince Baptist leaders to support the guy. And they wouldn't because of their deeply held biblical beliefs. Only later, and I'm not talking about much later, to learn that they also were in serial affairs. I think that's the thing, is that they're so morally lax about their candidates because they're morally lax about themselves.
Yeah.
It's shocking.
You and David have talked about this in various places, sort of the alt-right kind of backlash that you received, especially on issues of race. I mean, you talk about disillusioning when that kind of thing starts happening and you're wondering, is this really what this country's like?
I know. Before I adopted my littlest baby, who's now 16, I didn't see racism around me. And I think David and I have talked about it. It's like, why are we suddenly seeing it everywhere? And I think it's because if you're a middle-class, white, evangelical Christian, it's not necessarily like socially acceptable to be racist casually or in social settings. And so you just don't talk about it. But let's say that there's 100 people and 1 out of 100, to use a low estimate, is a racist. If 1 out of 100 is racist, you and I wouldn't ever see it. But if you were Black and 1 in 100 were racist, you would see it all the time. And so when we adopted Naomi, I noticed people following us at Nordstrom's and following us at different stores, and people at her school called her the N-word. And I mean, and that's small in comparison to the stuff that we saw online, which was people taking photos of my daughter and using racial slurs and photoshopping her into Auschwitz chambers and having Donald Trump pull the gas lever, photoshopping her face onto historical photos of slaves. And the worst thing was that people said that we had not adopted Naomi, but that she was the product of an illegitimate affair that I did not have. They said that I had it. I did not have an affair while David was in Iraq, but that's what they were claiming, that the Times worked out. And so at one point I went online and saw videos that had been faked, obviously, of me. I'm trying to think how to say this politely, but enjoying the company of several Black men while David looks through a window, like this kind of stuff that is so insidious that people like us can't even talk about it because it is so outside the realm of our normal conversations. And so it's just egregious. And you can't just call your friend and say, hey, so this is what's happening to me. What's your advice? Because their advice usually was, what? This is, I've never even heard of evil like this. And, Hallmark doesn't make a card. So it was very isolating. And because I'm a sex abuse victim, it made me feel so much more shame to have all these people online talking about me in this way. It was just anathema. It was horrible.
What's it like being in a church that's majority Black now?
Yes, we go to a majority Black church in Nashville, and it's wonderful. I love it so much. We have a wonderful pastor, and our church is maybe 85-15. Our youngest is adopted from Ethiopia. That's why all of these conversations had happened. But it's so wonderful. So recently, many of you have followed my journey online, and I had gotten a recent cancer diagnosis. So I'm as bald as an eagle. This is a wig. And I wanted to wear a scarf to church this past Sunday morning so that I didn't look, like Telly Savalas. And so I said, Naomi, I'd love to wear a scarf, but I don't know how to do that. And she said, Mom, Black women wear scarves and I'm Black. So, but it was so wonderful because she wore her scarf and I wore a scarf, and we walked into church and there were all these beautiful Black women wearing scarves, and they gave us a head nod and they made a big deal at how cute we were, which we were. And there was something so endearing to that. And when we left, Naomi took my hand and she goes, I'm so glad I know how to tie scarves now. It makes me feel closer to my culture. And that broke my heart. But, it's very difficult to raise a child who's a different race than you. And it's, you have to sort of figure out, how do you do it? How do you do it naturally and organically so it's not a library project? And so we decided to go to this predominantly African-American church so that we're the ones who stick out like a sore thumb, not Naomi. And it's been very beautiful.
And an amazing preacher.
An amazing preacher. And there's a lot, because we went from a PCA church to Strong Tower. And at our new church, there's a few more amens.
Yeah.
As you might imagine. Very enthusiastic and lovely and amazingly life-giving, which is what I need.
You were talking in the book, and we have talked elsewhere about this situation that happened with a critic of yours, particularly a critic of David's, that you built a relationship with. Can you tell us about that?
Okay, so people hate us online. Some people love us. So after I wrote that Washington Post piece about my sexual abuse, I was so disillusioned by the church's response. I decided to follow anybody who was kind to me. This is part of that process of readjusting, like what you think about how you connect with people. So anytime someone made a positive comment, I liked it and I followed them, which meant that I started following a person named Kathy Kattenberg. And I thought she was a person. Her profile image was a "I stand with immigrants" icon. So she hated David French. Even though she was kind to me, she had made one kind comment to me. And then I started noticing every time I logged on that she disagreed with David about anti-Semitism, abortion, literally anything you can mention. She herself had 4 abortions, I think. So she was very loud about that. And so anytime David posted about abortion, she was like, why don't you, you hate women. I mean, it was like off the chain. It wasn't your normal criticism. Well, about 10 years ago, I made this probably ill-conceived idea, this goal of when I see someone in duress, I stop to try to help them, which, by the way, has landed me in the floor of the LaGuardia bathroom with a drunken passenger who got kicked off a flight, where I was assuring her that she had inherent dignity under, God's eyes, all the stuff. The stuff that has happened has been crazy, but this is the craziest. So Kathy tweeted that she did not have any food. It was during the COVID crisis, and that she hadn't been able to get any food for weeks. I did not want to reach out to Kathy Gattenberg, but I did. And I was like, hey, I'm Nancy French. I'm David's wife. I saw your tweet. Are you food insecure? And she goes, oh, I think we need to talk on the phone, which is like my Waterloo. I don't want to talk on the phone. And so
you're a Gen Z.
I guess. I mean, that proclivity for sure. I'm Gen X, solidly almost 50. So she called me on the phone. She had this New York accent, and I sound like this. And she was explaining to me that she was disabled and couldn't leave the house. And because of the COVID crisis, all of the delivery services were overwhelmed, and that she'd been eating pancake mix for 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, Kathy, we can do this. And we could not do this. I mean, I tried everything. I called synagogues. She's Jewish. I called PCA churches. No one could help because everybody needed help. I thought her situation was much more dire than just, people like me who couldn't get out of, being cautious. And so I called Kathy the 4th day, and we talked every day, and she'd given me her little grocery list and all of the things she wanted from Aldi's, which was so sweet. And we really got to know each other. And she goes, Nancy, why are you doing this? And I was like, I don't know, Kathy. Jesus, I just made this vow because I'm a Christian and we are supposed to take care of each other. And I don't know. And she laughed so hard. And I was like, but I am failing. This is the 4th day. So now she's 2 weeks and 4 days with only eating pancake mix. And I said, I don't know what to do. And I was almost crying and she was almost crying. And I said, I guess we could pray. And that is the type of thing that Christians say and no one really prays. And Kathy, who's Jewish, said, okay, pray then. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do not want to pray. I don't pray out loud. And I definitely didn't want to pray out loud with this person who trolls us constantly. But I was like, okay, Kathy, but I don't know how Jews pray and I don't want to offend you. And she goes, just pray. It's no big deal. So we prayed and the food came in truckfuls because I'd made like 3 different orders in the hopes that one would click. None of them clicked until they clicked simultaneously. So she ended up with like 24 cans of tomatoes and, 30 bananas. I mean, and she was crying and I was crying, and it was so sweet to get to know someone. And I realized through that process that behind the mean tweets is usually some serious trouble, And so I learned from Kathy that when you see people who are acrimonious online, there's probably more to the story. And I hope to have more compassion towards people like that. I love Kathy. We've met her in person. When I go to New York, I invite her to my events and we get to hang out. I've been to her place. And anyway, this is like 3 years later, and I love Kathy Kettenberg. I tell her I love her on the phone. It's the biggest 180 that I think it can happen just online like that.
I wonder why it's so hard for that to happen. I mean, it's so rare that people are actually able to make that connection. It seems like once you do, it's that initial point of contact, but it's just really rare right now.
It is so rare. And I have a lot of horror stories. That's my success story. But I've reached out to people and been eviscerated. But I think it's important.
For reaching out to them?
Yeah, well, for reaching out to them, and then they Google me.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And then I sit down and they're like loaded for bear. They're ready to absolutely put me on a skillet.
You write about in this book, Ghosted, about a lot of good things, but also a lot of really, really hard things growing up in rural America. And when we look around and you see, I know as somebody who came from a rural part of a, not rural place, but a rural part of it, there's a lot of people who are really struggling in rural America when you look at teen pregnancy rates, when you look at opioid addiction rates, you look at alcoholism rates, you look at job loss, you look at all of those things. I'm sure when you look back, you can think of a lot of people who didn't make it in those kinds of circumstances. Why did you?
I have no idea. I am, I'll tell you the truth of what my theory is, and it's actually the truth, but this will make everybody groan and roll their eyes. David French. When I met him, and you can see it in the book, the first 4 chapters is trauma, 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 trauma. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to make sure no one actually gets this book. But when David French shows up, and y'all don't tell him I said this, it changed the trajectory of my life in so many ways, immeasurable. Like, I can't even tell you, the trajectory just changed, and it went from going down to going up. And going up, I'm not talking about financially or whatever. I'm talking about like hope. I might not even be here if I hadn't met him. But there's something so beautiful about love because it sort of covers over you in a way so that you don't have to be marred by shame or. Yeah. I know that people hate it when I say that. David French changed my life, and meeting him is the point at which everything starts getting better. So if you're reading the book and you're depressed because so much bad happens, just wait until he shows up, and then a lot of crazier things happen.
You know what I think happened?
What?
Because I think when you're talking about love and finding your person, I think all that's true. But I think there's an additional element to it. And that is, how his name is escaping me right now, but the psychologist several years ago was talking about how you can tell when a couple's headed for disaster once they start to have contempt, not just arguing, but they have contempt. Well, I see kind of an opposite thing, which is whenever David talks about you when you're not there, there's just this beaming pride. So it's not just that he loves you. It's just like he's so proud of you. And when you mentioned that about you're never going to be bored together.
Right.
I think that's a big part of it is the way that the two of you sort of the interplay that goes on there of people who don't just love each other, but you obviously like each other and obviously respect each other too. I think that's key.
I think so too. And the thing about David that y'all probably don't know, I mean, I know he writes about erudite topics, but the man is a 12-year-old at heart. I mean, he loves to have fun. You know this. Once, Russell, he was going to meet with some senators, and he comes out of the bathroom and he's wearing a Memphis Grizzlies beanie that has a big poof ball of yarn at the top. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, you got to show him who's boss. And I was like, oh my gosh, literally, what is wrong with him? But he prioritizes fun in such a beautiful way. So we have so much fun as a family. We watch TV together. We play games together. The predominant sound here is laughter, punctuated by all the normal things of life. But he has this zest for life that is so beautiful.
You referenced this a little bit ago, and we talked earlier about being disillusioned by seeing all of the awful things that a lot of us have seen over the past several years. You recently got a cancer diagnosis, and you're going through chemo right now.
Right.
As we're talking. What have you learned about faith and hope and love through that so far?
So I'm not sure about the faith angle because I'm so sort of in shock.
Mm-hmm.
The craziest thing is that I met a guy on a sidewalk almost 30 years ago, and I liked him because I thought he was funny and, fun. And now he's taking me to chemo, and he will not miss chemo for anything. You just go and you sit. I'm on my laptop. I'm probably tweeting, but he's right beside me. And he's rescheduled trips so that he can sit beside me. And I think the thing that is so freaking exhilarating about the whole thing is when you can see the effects of love and how deep it goes, if that makes sense. Because I know we've been married almost 30 years and we've had so many crazy things, and he almost ran for president and all this stuff. And he was deployed to Iraq, for heaven's sake. We've had so many ups and downs, but this is because I have a very aggressive form, and just being loved by everyone. And the other correlation of this is so weird, but I was outed as a cancer patient. So David was on a Zoom, and he didn't realize the mic was live. And so he was chit-chatting, and I don't think you were there, Russell. It was an after party thing, but he started speaking and he goes, sorry, I'm late. Nancy had to have surgery and chemo port surgery. And so all of the people in the comments, they were like, did you hear that? Nancy, friend, what's wrong with Nancy? Whatever. And so this was very new. This was back because there was maybe a 1 to 2 week period of time where I thought the cancer had spread because it's in my lymph nodes and all that. And I thought I was dying. And I intend to live. But so I was outed. And I had not intended to tell people about it because I don't know why. There's something that's so personal and horrible about it. But after it was out, I decided just to make an announcement. So I write this thing we're better together. And, I don't want to tell you this, but I think I'm going to overcome my fears. Well, y'all didn't know that I was already outed. And that was all sort of me trying to put my best face on it. But having done that was so wonderful for me. So we've talked a lot about the cesspool that is formerly known as Twitter, but so help me, I love these social media platforms. I love them. People have been so kind. And so I decided to be honest about my cancer. I also decided to post photos when my hair finally fell out and I looked different. I decided to post that picture. And so when I did that, I got all these messages from people who have been sort of silently dealing with their cancer because me, they wanted to keep it secret. And being public about it has been so sweet. I mean, you guys brought food, and people have sent me 50 million pairs of socks and blankets and an electric blanket, and just my house is full of love. It's not that I needed the extra pair of socks, but by golly, I'm wearing them. And when I wear them, I feel the love. And it's from strangers. It's from friends. It's from the church. It's just been so invigorating and life-giving. I'm so thankful that it came out.
I really encourage all of our listeners to get this book, Ghosted. I mean, I promise you, you will start it and will not want to take the time to put the bookmark in and go do something else. It's a riveting story and, like I said, dark and hilarious at the same time. And you would just have to read it to see what I mean. Nancy French, we are fans of yours here and are so glad to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for everything.
If you enjoy The Russell Moore Show, take a second to share this episode with a friend or leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. The Russell Moore Show is a production of Christianity Today. Executive producers are Eric Petrick, Russell Moore, and Mike Cosper. Host is Russell Moore. Produced by Ashley Hales. Associate producers are Abby Perry and Mackenzie Hill. Director of Operations for CT Media is Matt Stevens. Audio engineering provided by Dan Phelps. Video producer is Abby Egan. And the theme song for The Russell Moore Show is Dusty Delta Day by Lennon Hutton.